We are here today to talk on episode 67 about the topic of accountability and culture. We've looked at this topic before. We've kind of talked about different aspects on some of our previous episodes. So this time we wanted to get really specific on what exactly we're going on or what we're talking about here. And maybe you're worried that by keeping someone accountable, you'll go against culture or maybe worse, destroy it. So this is a line that leaders we need to walk. We need to figure out where the right place is to fall. And holding your team accountable within the culture can at times seem confusing. So, Blake, let's talk about some best practices in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about, we always got to revisit culture. What is culture? Simply put, culture is environment. Our culture and our environment are so important to the success of our team. As leaders, we know that our replicable results that we get are directly proportional to the health of our culture. So it is good that we're worried about destroying our culture when we're talking about holding people accountable. Sometimes we're worried that if we say something to a teammate, they're just going to leave. And maybe that's true. Sometimes we're afraid that, like, if we don't say anything, things will just work themselves out. And I'm just here to tell you that we think we're doing our culture justice by not dealing with problems or holding people accountable, but it can end up causing so many other issues by not just dealing with things. Okay.
Yeah.
We talk, I love, I'll use this analogy almost every time about being a buffalo and going into hard times and dealing with hard issues. When we are focused on being a cow who runs away from the storm catches up to it and you just stay in the storm long term. When we act like a buffalo, we run into the storm, we deal with things immediately head on, and then we deal with the other issues around them. That doesn't mean we need to be rash, and it doesn't mean we need to be reckless. I really think that if we're talking about culture and environment, we need to be talking about us being a good gardener, right? And even in my book Uncultured, I talk about how culture is a lot like a garden, and you're working the soil and trying to get all the variables right. But you've got to be a really wise gardener. Okay, holding someone accountable is not the rashness or the immature gardener who always just hacks away at weeds with a machete. Why? Because you're going to destroy the crop. You're going to
Right.
destroy the people around you. It's not the impatience of the immature gardener who doesn't hold realistic expectations. So they end up drowning the crop because they just start pouring more water. Well, if I give it water, it'll grow. Well, that's an immature gardener there. Okay. So it's not just about, like, you got to test the soil, see how much moisture is in the soil before you just like, well, just add water and it makes everything better. That's not true. Okay. And it's not being the fearful or lazy gardener who sees that weeds need to be dealt with, but hopes that they'll just work itself out. And I know I'm speaking kind of like metaphorically here, but the reality is we've got to become a good pruner and a good gardener who understands the crop, who understands what the culture is so it knows how to keep things accountable. So my first thing is not say hard things. Okay. Hard things need to be said. I agree 100%. Hard things need to be said, but they need to be done tactfully and wisely. There needs to be a wisdom of a gardener who knows, hey, this type of crop actually doesn't need this amount of water. They need this amount of water. They need this amount of sun. They actually need shade at this time of day. How do all these things happen? They don't happen on accident. They happen by having the right gardener in place to cultivate this. But becoming that gardener takes time. It takes experience. It takes constant learning. And it takes understanding. So we have to have all of that before we jump into the idea of holding someone accountable. You need to know what your culture is. You need to know what those expectations should be, but don't just jump into this. Did you have something to say on that, Pete?
Yeah. So I was actually just thinking, it's really important as we talk about this. If you've not defined your culture yet, it's really important that you start there first. So I really just want to take a pause for a moment, just time out. And if you've not defined that, go now. That's your first step, is define that culture. if the culture has been defined for you already, or you're part of that culture, you help define it, whatever that looks like, it's known, then it's really good for you to know it very, very well. Because if you're going to hold people accountable without destroying your culture, it's really important that you know that culture too. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I do think it's important that we bring it up. That, like Blake is saying, if we're going to be pruning our garden, if we're going to be cultivating it, it's important for us to know what's in the garden, right? It's important for us to know what plants are planted there, what the outcome is, what the goal is looking like. All those things are important so that we can make the right decisions moving forward when it comes to accountability, which we can talk about, as pruning or taking care of the things, right? We got to know what's there in order to take care of it. So first off, just make sure that you know what your culture is. If it's not defined, define it first. Secondly, too, I think we need to take a look here now at kind of like a little deeper into the word accountability, if you would, Blake. I think it's a one that we throw out a lot. And a lot of people, I mean, I may be just making an assumption on this, but I think a lot of people don't stop and think about what the word actually means, because that helps define what our actions are moving forward.
Yeah. So for sure, I mean, part of having that understanding as a gardener, if you will, and being wise in those ways, like I was sitting down really chewing on like what is accountability, and like we say so quickly, holding someone accountable. And a lot of times, just even like the word transformation, I feel like there's a power in understanding that transformation is not just growing. That when you break it down and you break those two parts of the word of trans, which stands for beyond, and the word form, which stands for the word form, then you're going to the form beyond, right? And there's something about that helps push and like catapult you to greater growth. So when I think about the word accountable, I didn't have any of those fuzzy things until I started digging into it, right? And so I think what's important here is let's break it apart. Let's see what the pieces mean and see if there's something there. And as I broke it apart, I felt heavy responsibility in what it means to hold someone accountable, because they're broken into two parts. There's the word account, which means to give count, to reckon for. But really what it's saying is that like you're given something to be responsible for, and not just responsible for the thing, but for the result of the thing. So you are the one on the account who is responsible for its growth, its failure, its success. It is on you. You are the one that when the account is called, you have to give a reckon for it. And so that's heavy. Like we need to understand that there is that element of responsibility, right? That, hey, we're holding you accountable. Here's what we've given you. What's the result? Tell us. But the other side is kind of interesting too. See, the other side is able. And I think real quick, we're like, yeah, you're able, right? No big deal. Maybe, because there's three parts that are part of this word able. So this is your ability, right? And we're going to talk a little deeper here, but it's your ability to give an account for. It's your ability to be responsible for. So the first part of able is having the power, skill, or resources. Does this person have the power? So you, leader, the person holding someone accountable for said thing, real quick, do they have the power, the skill, or the resources? I think we treat people differently when we understand they do or don't, or it's their first time doing something. Like the vetted project manager who's done it for years, you hold them to a different level of accountability than you probably do a brand new person into this role. You probably have grace for things when they fail that you wouldn't have for someone who's vetted long term.
Yeah.
So understanding that power, that skill, or their resources is really important when you know what level of grace you're going to give or what level of accountability you're going to give in that moment, right? The next part of able is not just having the power, skill, or resources, it's having the quality or nature. Does this person have the nature and the quality as a person to hold this thing that you're holding them accountable for, and not just in the success, but do they have it in the character? That's something I haven't even thought about at this level. I mean, I think I've thought about it in a gut, like, "Ooh, that was off brand. Don't do that." Like, we don't stand for that. We stand for this. And being able to hold people accountable to that degree. But have we looked at it from that angle? I know that I don't intentionally always do it that way. And it's
Hmm.
usually a secondary response to that, that if they're not sure and don't understand that they should be held accountable or have to give an account based off their character, then yeah, maybe we got some issue there and some lack of clarity. And then the last one, which you may not like if you're a helicopter parent or you're a micromanager, this will not be a fun one to hear. But the ability part of being able to give an account is also having the freedom or opportunity.
Hmm.
So, are they actually able? Or are you trying to micromanage every little thing that you're causing this impedance to their ability to do the thing? So, I know that's a crazy thing to break apart here, but now we're not just looking at, hey, what's their ability? Like, we gave them this responsibility and what's your result? Yeah, but did they have the power, skill, and resources? Did they have the right nature in the first place and the quality of person that's hitting your brand and their way of doing things? And do they have the freedom or opportunity to do what they need to do to make those results happen? If they don't, then they're not accountable. They're account unable. And that's
Yeah.
not fair at all to them. And so part of it, I think we have to inwardly first look at ourselves, not look at, like, yes, we have to look at them, but we need to look at them through these things and look at us. Are we going to give them the stuff they need? Because sometimes we have to put someone in an accountable position who is not ready based off the power, skill, and resource.
Yeah.
And what kind
True.
of runway are you going to give for that? So I think we have to think through that. Man, it's just such all that stuff. Man, I'm preaching this stuff to myself right now because it's so deep and rich. But when we hold someone accountable, we have to look at it through that process before we jump much deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. Another area too that I think is an area of caution, because I like that you brought up these three things. You know, do they have the power, the skill, resources, quality, nature, freedom, opportunity? Right. Those are areas that we need to be watchful for too on our side. Another area is to make sure that we're not thinking accountability is just a one-time thing. Right. It's easy to say, well, I told them, so it should be done, right? That's not, unfortunately, that's not how it works. There is a principle in communication around the number of times something is communicated before the message is received, and that is 7 times. Usually 7 times is before someone needs to see it or hear that message of what you're trying to communicate before they accept it, understand it, whatever it may be. So saying it just one time is not going to cut it. So holding someone accountable for one time or one moment or in one instance is not going to suddenly transform them into the person that that you want them to be, the development that they're on, right? That's going to help their growth. Absolutely. But you have to continue that accountability multiple times. And maybe it's not always on the same thing, right? Maybe it's a different project or a different aspect, but it has to continue. One way too that I want to bring out that is a surefire way if you want to destroy your culture in your organization through accountability is to pick and choose who you're going to hold accountable and to what level. Like you set the bar differently for each person and not based on their ability, their skills, or the project they're working on, but on your ranking of who they are or how much you like them or whatever it may be. Doing that is a surefire way to absolutely destroy the culture of your organization 100%. It will not last that. So be very careful when you're as a leader. And I know that we're putting a lot of responsibility out there on leaders for this because there's a lot of heaviness involved with this. Be sure that you're not picking and choosing. Make sure that that level, that your accountability applies to every person on your team or across the organization, however your position looks or your role looks. It's got to be the same across the whole board. It cannot just be picking and choosing.
Yeah. And people care deeply about results. I just don't buy it when people are like, they just don't care at all. Look, if they don't care at all, they shouldn't be on the team, period.
Yep.
They should never have got to where they are today if they just don't care about results and purpose. They do. It might not be in the area you want, but you have to kind of vet that there. Okay. Um, if they do care about purpose, which I imagine they do, and they do care about the results they're getting, then they don't mind being corrected or held to a standard, but they don't like to be held to those things or blindsided if they don't know what they're being held accountable to. Okay.
Yes.
Part of this able part is knowing what it is. Okay. So, how do we hold others accountable without destroying our culture? Well, the first thing is we have to do this intentionally. This is intentional work. Everything we're doing has to have intentionality because, yes, you're right. There will be a point when you can destroy your culture by how you're holding people accountable because what you're doing to the one person is going to have a story that goes to the team. People watching what you do to the one person and holding someone accountable are watching how they believe you are going to do this to everyone. So, yes, you have to be intentional about this because people will not want to deal with the way you hold people accountable if you do it recklessly. If people feel like you're just going to fly off the deep end at them, or they feel like you're going to hold them accountable to things that have never been stated or said, then they are going to resist and they're going to try to skate by under the radar instead of risking and growing and taking things on and becoming a next level leader. Okay. So this is intentional work and we have to be careful. The next thing that I want to say is that we are all growing in this process. Okay. So you're going to mess up. Things are going to happen where it doesn't look great. That's okay. Okay. Part of that intentionality is learning. Okay. Be a leader who is a learner. Okay. You are constantly, I did it this way. I feel like I came off like this. This is not touchy-feely bullshit. This is self-actualization. This is me becoming a better leader so that I can make sure that I hold people accountable to the standards that we've set in place. And yes, I believe we've clarified all these things about how this person needs to be held accountable. Now, I need to say hard things, but I need to be direct in it. I need to say what it is that I'm holding them accountable for. And if I'm fuzzy or gray in any area, a lot of times I'll even, while I'm holding people accountable for things, I'll say stuff like, maybe I wasn't clear on this. Can you explain this back to me? Like, what am I holding you accountable? What's your metric that I hold you accountable to? Okay. What's the goal for that? What are we trying to hit? Okay. Are you hitting it? Like, that's a lot easier to take someone through that path than to just be like, you're failing. Well, hold on. What I just said was a value-based thing. You are failing. Whoa, slow down. Let's talk about this like two human beings. I feel like I've been a human being for a while, long enough that I can say these things. But, I think people like to be talked to like people and not talked at, because if they are responsible and held accountable, then that means that they should have enough respect that you can talk to them like a person in that accountability. So take a break. We're all growing here. They're growing in this process, and so are you. But it is an intentional process that we need to be taking so that we can get better. Okay, so that was number 2. We're all growing.
Yeah. So number 3, you brought it. You kind of touched on it here, Blake, but it's having clarity. We must have clarity on goals, results, timetables, expectations, the whole 9 yards. It has to be clear. You can't just say, hey, I want you to complete this project without telling them what the project is, when the deadline is, and what result you want from the project, right? You've got to clearly lay out your expectations in order to be able to hold them accountable to those expectations.
Yeah, that's good. And it's not always easy because we don't always have the answers in front of us.
Right.
But I'm going to tell you that if that person's in a place of responsibility at that level, you can work through those goals and expectations in such an easy way that everyone's going to feel good about it, right? So that we can go on to those next areas as well. So the next one is that we have got to identify clear ability or development. Okay, this is that part that we were talking about earlier. Are they able? I think that you've got to be honest with the position. You've got to be honest with your team. hey, we're going to put someone in this position. They are going to be accountable. We're going to give them the things that they're going to be accountable for, but we're going to give some grace too. This is their first time. And not only are we going to give grace, but we need to give an extra layer of development so that they can grow in confidence in this place too. Okay. So that means if they're not able, and all you do is say they'll learn by fire, and you never create any development, the only thing that fire begets when it's uncontrolled, and that's the only like lever that you pull, is fire. So you are constantly going to be in fires or having your culture burning to the ground if you don't add development in there somehow. So we've got to have clear ability where we help them understand, hey, they do have this, they do have this. These are things they're strong in. We should hold them a little more accountable in these areas, or at least like have less of a grace meter. But on these areas where they're weak, we got to help in the development, and we got to give a little bit longer grace leash, if you will, because they've got to work through this. They've got to fail. Failure is going to happen. How do we teach through that? So we need to identify clear ability or development.
Yeah, number 5 here is we must have buy-in, an agreement of terms and runway. And really, just plainly put, after we've laid it out, here's the plan, here's the goals, here's the result that we're looking for, here's the timetable. The person has to say, yep, I agree to this. I think this is doable. I feel like I've been given the opportunity. I've been given the tools that I need. I feel that I have the freedom to come and ask questions as needed, and I believe I can get this done in that time. You've got to have that buy-in. Without that, they are not agreeing to anything.
Mm.
They're not saying, yes, I will take this on. They're just listening to you talk.
Right.
And the reality is nothing will happen. They're not going to grow. You're going to be frustrated, right? So at the end of it all, don't go through all of these steps and get to the end and go, okay, sounds good, see ya. Without getting that buy-in. That's the solidification there of all these pieces, is bringing it all together, and both of you agree that you're on the same page. That's the opportunity too, to make sure that they don't have any other questions, that they're not thinking it's something different than what it is. So keep in mind, number 5, we must have buy-in. So accountability is crucial for growth and success. But we can also, when it's done wrong, use accountability to stunt growth. It can hinder our progress. And even at times, it can bring an entire organization to just a grinding halt. As a leader, it's important that you set the example of accountability for yourself first, then in your interactions with your team. Be sure to remember those 5 key accountability pieces that we talked about. 1, it's intentional work. 2, everyone is growing. Must have clarity. Number 4, we've got to identify the clear ability or development. And number 5, crucial piece here, is we must have buy-in. Thank you guys for joining us this week on the Ridgeline Leadership Podcast. See you guys next time.